So I just thought I'd give you a bit of a sense of, in case you don't know what Sydney Living Museums are, we run 12 museums across Sydney, ranging from house museums like Elizabeth Bay House to places like this, the Museum of Sydney, to more traditional places like Elizabeth Farm. And in each of our properties, our collections are treated quite differently. So a little bit like we're talking about digital iterations and things like that. We do that with physical objects, where we sometimes create copies of original pieces and put the master away somewhere so that people can come and play in our places. So Elizabeth Farm is one of those places where people are allowed to hang out and sit on the chairs. And then we have other places like Rouse Hill, which is a very original place, where we have something like 6 generations of the one family living in the place. The last person living in there permanently left in 95, but the last person who lived in there from time to time only left in 2014. So it's had a very long period of life. And they were hoarders, so there's layer upon layer upon layer of life in this house. And what we're trying to do with that place is hold it in that particular moment, which I'll get to in a moment, but it can be quite challenging. And then we have places like Susanna Place, which is a range of terrace houses you might know in the rocks near the Australian pub. And we've got original fabric, in like the walls and everything is original, but we've added pieces in to give a bit of context. And in fact, this is one of the ladies who lived in the house for some period of time. And we also have a lot of oral histories from them, which unfortunately are mostly still on tape, and we do need to do something about that quite soon. So that's the sort of thing we're dealing with, where we have physical objects, but then we have all these oral histories and digital material that comes along with that. I thought I'd just come back to some of the sort of things that we do around conservation that are a lot more traditional than what these two wonderful ladies are talking about. A lot of my time is spent on preventive conservation, where we're trying to stop things before they get to be a problem. And mostly that involves dealing with pests and rats and all sorts of crazy animals. Environmental management, looking at controlling light. A lot of the time we do that traditionally by closing the windows. And good housekeeping, we spend a lot of time cleaning. As my grandmother and my mother point out, I am nothing but a glorified cleaner. It's very kind of them. And trying to get good storage conditions. But we do what we call interventive conservation from time to time, which is where we're actually physically working with objects. And a lot of that involves examining them and thinking about them before we do anything. And I'm going to touch on that in a minute, because it's something people often don't think about with what we do. They think, oh, you just get in there and you do these amazing big wow things. But in fact, a lot of the time is spent looking at the condition of something and thinking about what's important about it and understanding where it is we're going with it. And as it says here, there's a whole lot of things involved in treatment. This is just an example of the sorts of things that we do, where we're not trying to bring it back to something, we're just trying to hold it in a particular moment. So this is a David Jones hat box, and as you can see, the lid is falling apart, and all we've done is put in enough Japanese tissue to hold it together, and that's the sort of thing that we do, so it can get like that. So as you can see, we're not trying to bring it back to a certain moment, we're just trying to hold it where it is. Traditionally in conservation, and I'm sorry, I am talking about more traditional conservation rather than the wonderful digital stuff you guys do, we try to be reversible, but what we find sometimes is that is just a fail. So this is an example of that, where this object was repaired with a traditional B72, which is a fully reversible adhesive, so reversible it reversed right off itself and fell back. So after a bit of discussion, we decided that it was much more effective to intervene a little bit, make a little bit of change, so that we could avoid the arm falling off and damaging something else. So if you have a look here, you can see at the top was the original hook, which was meant to be a straight pin but had been bent, and we just decided it wasn't worth trying to keep that anymore. pulled it off and put a new one on and used a much stronger adhesive, which isn't particularly reversible, but it's worth it.
They do the same thing with digital.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, exactly. And it's that change. We say at Rouse Hill we talk about a little bit of change to avoid a major catastrophe. And originally at Rouse Hill there was a really strong idea of leaving things to the very last minute and then intervening, but we found that what happens then is that you end up actually with a lot more change than had you made a little bit of change early on. So that's the sort of the geeky discussions we have a lot. Again, this is where you don't have to always go all the way. This is a lovely print from Hyde Park Barracks. It was stuck onto a really horrible piece of acidic board, and so after treatment it still had this hint of that around it. But when you put it in a mat, no one's going to see that. So often we don't have to get to the point of being perfect. We can mask and hide and do all sorts of things. And again, with a lot of our stuff, as I said, it's the story of it that's important. So we're very interested in all the things that brought it to be where it is, and the experience of people coming to our houses. We want them to experience them as old and aged places, and if we make everything look perfect, you don't understand that it's a 100-year-old book. If you bring it back to the day it was made, well, what's the point? So with this book, you can see up the top that it was split quite a way along here, and the conservator was able to just use some Japanese tissue to hold that together. Now, obviously, we're not using these books every day. If this was in a lending library, you wouldn't be able to get away with this because it would just fall apart again. But because we're not using them regularly, this is enough to hold it together. Now, what I wanted to talk about now, which is getting a little bit closer to the actual topic of the day, we have a lot of musical instruments, well, a number of them in our collections, and they've come in for different reasons. This cello is thought to be Mrs. Macquarie's cello. We do know that it's an 1814 cello that came from a maker in London. The name and the date are inside. And it is part of the collection of the Museum of Sydney, which collects material to do with all of the governors of the time, that first government house. And there's some question about whether it is Mrs. Macquarie's, but we certainly know it's of that age. And it can sit there on display and you really don't get a sense of it. You know, you look at it and go, oh, it's very nice. But if you don't hear it, you only get half the story. So we have got recordings of it that you can listen to next to it. But from time to time, it does get lent out for performances. Now, we have done some work on it. When it came in, it had steel strings, and we've replaced them, put them back to gut strings, and the bridge is a new bridge because the bridge that was there wasn't original, and we know when we've worked with different cellists that it's quite important to them the height of the bridge. The cello hasn't been used a lot over the years, so it has its original varnish, which is very unusual for a cello of this age. So we're very careful whenever it's used. It gets brushed down afterwards to make sure, because what happens with cellos is that the rosin, which is used on the strings, goes everywhere, sticks onto the varnish, and then eventually it gets all icky and people clean off the varnish and revarnish it. So we're quite careful about that. We're also quite careful. We talk through who's selected as a cellist to play it. They come and have a couple of tests with us so that they understand how it works, because not all cellists play gut-stringed instruments, and it is quite a different experience. And I've also found it helps to where the cellist is playing, because when they rehearse in our objects store, they say it's dreadful. When I take them out to our, we've got a room a viewing cube it's called, and it's all glass, and the acoustics are very, very different. They love it. So I now know, don't let them rehearse in the object store. And this is Simon, who is he's a violin maker and cello maker who works with us on the cello, because like Asti and I were just saying, like you guys work with all sorts of different technicians, we work with a whole lot of different people who are specialists with our instruments. And this is the cello on its holiday in Bathurst. they wanted to borrow it for their anniversary, 200 years, and so there was a piece written by Peter Sculthorpe for the cello called Mrs. Macquarie's Chair, and it's for cello and didgeridoo, so that's the guys rehearsing for that. So it's just a nice little sort of thing. We have a number of pianos in our collection, and this is one of them at Elizabeth Bay House. It was donated to Vaucluse House in 1924 or 5. So it's an early 19th century square piano by a piano maker called Litchfield Binks. We have 2 Litchfield Binks pianos in our collection, and strangely there's only 3 or 4 others that we can find on any catalogue around the world, so we're very curious to know more about Mr. Litchfield Binks. I don't know if you can see it very well, it's in the corner there, that kind of blobby thing. There, that's a bit better, now you can see it. So it's an early piano, and because Litchfield Binks is not well known, we really want to know more about this piano before we do anything, because we believe it's quite rare. We have looked in it. This is This is a recording of the Passmore brothers who tuned it in the 1930s, and there are still, I think, a 3rd generation Passmore is still a piano tuner in Port Macquarie, I think, which is quite interesting. Piano tuners and different people do leave messages on pianos, which is a really lovely little thing. It has a few issues. We often have problems with, we find clothes moths and carpet beetles when we dig deep inside our instruments, and it does have a small crack in it. And you can see this is one of the other things that often comes out. These are the little lead pins that have corroded a bit and caused a bit of a split in that. But what we're looking at is, well, what changes have been made? Whose hands have been on this and what's going on? So you can see there are various little repairs that have gone on. And we're just trying to figure out who did which bit. Because for us in museums, they're not just an instrument to be played, but they're also a representative of a whole lot of the history, and we're really interested in that whole history and what that tells us. Oh, so what I was just going to say was, because of all of this, we've not got it back to playing condition. We may be able to, and we're exploring that sort of thing, but instead what we've done, because we have a lot of sheet music in our houses as well, and we've been doing a research project looking particularly at Rouse Hill, Throsby Park, and a couple of things in our library collection. We've got a lot of information about the sort of music that was played in the early 19th century in homes around New South Wales. And by looking at the actual music, sheet music, and the annotations on it, we can tell which were the popular pieces, which ones weren't played very much. And we've now been working with the Conservatorium of Music to get them played. We've done a couple of concerts, and our librarian who works on this project was very keen to have a square piano that could be played. We weren't particularly keen to get this one up to speed just at the moment. So we've managed to bring in another square piano that is in perfect condition, and that one's sitting in the house to be played so that we can get that experience. And we're now working on a project with the Conservatorium to get a whole lot of recordings done of the sheet music. So it's another aspect of the digital world is getting those digital recordings done so that what is a piece of paper with some notation on it can be heard in a way that makes sense for the time period that it was on. We don't want to play them on contemporary pianos because it's not going to make sense. So this is a harmonium at Rouse Hill, and you might be interested to note the TV also in the corner. As I was saying, Rouse Hill's the sort of place that nothing got thrown out. So the harmonium dates we now know to 1869, and obviously the TV's to the 1970s, and there they sit in the one room because that's the sort of thing that the Rouses did. At the moment, the harmonium is acting as a sideboard, but it is a harmonium. There it is in its glory. And we also have this wonderful book, the Harmonium Museum, which was written in the 1870s, that has a whole lot of music for harmoniums, funnily enough. So we've been pulling it apart in the same way that we've been looking at our other instruments. and getting inside and trying to figure out, we were trying to figure out its date because Matthew, our librarian, is doing an exhibition next year on musical instruments, and he wanted to know if it fitted within his time frame. And with the wonderful world of the internet, on the top left there, what you're seeing is the actual registration date of the instrument, or the registration number. The 360 is the number of the cabinet, and our colleagues in the Netherlands have assured us that the date is 1869 because they've got a whole register of this trays of harmoniums. So anyway, so we were digging around. There's some more notations that you can see. And it is in very, very good condition. Again, we've worked with Bronwyn Griffin, who was the musical instrument conservator at the Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences till they decided they didn't need one anymore, which is to my advantage because now she does work for me. And a couple of specialist organ people. And they have been fantastic at working with us. And again, you can see carpet beetles, dead ones, and a whole lot of stuff. But what I was just going to show you, so this is the top of the bellows, again in really good condition. But we were digging around trying to find the name Trazer. Now, the two that you can actually read are not from ours, they're from one in the Netherlands. But if you have a look on the top there, you'll see it's the same words, but they've been gouged out, and down the bottom it's just an enlargement of that. So back in 1869, Palings, who imported this harmonium, who were mostly dealing with, what are their names? A French company, gouged the name out. And we can only guess that it was because they didn't want the company in France to know that they were actually getting someone else's harmoniums in. So this is the sort of weird and wonderful thing you find deep inside harmoniums. What I was very quickly going to say was that, again, what we find is that the bellows have all sorts of repairs done to them. So the harmonium's generally in good condition apart from the bellows, which you kind of need if you want to listen to it. But they've got all these fantastic repairs, and we know that it's been done by Gerald, who lived in the house for a very long time, and including using contact adhesive. And we don't want to remove that. So we're at the point now of having a discussion about whether we leave it as a sideboard or we work on it to become a harmonium. And if we leave it as a sideboard, then we'll find another harmonium that we can record the music on and have that sound coming through. And I think that's enough.